Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler. This time we circle back to something we saw a while ago from the UK and look at its equivalent, which is a little bit different, from in Australia. Now you might be saying, wait a second, UK, Australia. Has there been a US equivalent? You didn't mention the US. Because there isn't one, which actually might give you a clue about what it is we're going to be talking about. A while back, we took a look at a special DVD from 2005, or pair of DVDs from 2005, that were included with The Sun and the News of the World newspapers in the UK. We took a look at this one, called Heroes and Villains. Remember, it said Collector's Edition DVD, blah, 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 had The Sun and News of the World. It's promoting episode 3. But you got this with The Sun, and inside it had space for the Heroes disc that came with this little sleeve. But then if you wanted the Villains disc, the other disc, you needed to pick up the next day's News of the World to get that disc, and you could throw away its original packaging and stuff the other disc in here to have a full item here. Or you could have kept the Villains disc in its original packaging, which is just this little sleeve here. Okay. And when we looked at them, we saw that they had sort of some plain, I guess you'd call them, labels here that denote them. But while it's called Heroes and Villains, it wasn't that it was one Heroes and Villains DVD. It was a Heroes DVD and a Villains DVD, whether you kept them separate or together. You may recall that for the Heroes DVD, it was like a little featurette hosted by Anthony Daniels talking about different heroes of the Star Wars saga. It had an opening that had the Heroes logo, instead of a Star Wars logo that appears and then fades back into the distance. And underneath it said, in association with, and it named the two newspapers, right? The Sun and News of the World. And then after that was over with, in order to give it more runtime, you then had one of the trailers for Revenge of the Sith, the little web documentary, This Weapon Is Your Life, and the little web documentary, Two Worlds, One Movie. And then on the Villains disc, it was very similar. A little Anthony Daniels hosted thing on the Villains of Star Wars, that had the opening with the Villains title, that had the names of the newspapers on it again. That's going to matter here in a moment. And then after that was finished playing, it would immediately then play another trailer for Revenge of the Sith, plus then the Creating Grievous little web documentary, and then One World, Two Movies, the opposite equivalent of that other web documentary. But then in each case, there is no menu on the DVD. You put it in, it just plays, and it's all run together as one video that runs a bit over 30 minutes on each of those DVDs. Well, in Australia, you also had a version of this. Also with two newspapers involved, also with essentially the same content or very, very close to it. And I'd seen these every once in a while online, hadn't actually taken the time to pick it up. Until recently, after having a conversation with Matthew Hardesty, our father Matthew Hardesty, who is both a Catholic priest and a Star Wars home video collector, I thought, you know what? Now's the time to actually look into this, because he had sort of sparked my interest in the idea again. And it turns out that Australia handled it a little bit differently. So, just like in the UK, you have a newspaper, in this case the Daily Telegraph, that gave us a Heroes disc. Here is that Heroes disc, or at least the sleeve for it, right? Star Wars Heroes. You have this art here, like for the Battlefront games and game promotions. 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment, Lucasfilm, Legalese, and then a little symbol there from Australia that says Parental Guidance Recommended. Okay. Now, assuming this is meant to be the front, it's not super busy. The back, or what I assume to be the back, much busier, has the Daily Telegraph, not for resale, blah, 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 blah. This DVD will not work in a CD-ROM drive. Duh, because it's a DVD. Then the PG rating, mild science fiction violence. This says, proudly supported by the Promotions Factory. Then Star Wars Heroes, again, different background back there, but sort of taking pieces from what we see in the front and whatnot. This is 2005, it's pulling on that same artwork there. Then it says, features an entire galaxy of facts on your favorite heroes from the Star Wars movies. Okay, nice. And then the disc label, also pretty busy. Star Wars Heroes, nothing over here, DVD. Same statement. Same the Promotions Factory thing over here. Daily Telegraph, PG, Lucasfilm, 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment, legalese around the edges. So similar, but slightly reorganized from the sleeve. And you put this in, one thing that strikes me is that there's an actual menu. Now, the only thing you can click is Heroes. It's just a menu that has the option for Heroes. Click it. It's the only thing you can do. And then it plays the exact same thing, almost, as what we got on the UK version. The only difference that I have noticed is that when it says Star Wars Heroes, going back into space, it doesn't have in association with and the name of any newspapers with it. That is gone. It's just the Heroes logo, which suggests to me, I think, because these are the more well-known ones, that maybe these were the originals, and then there was just an updated intro to give us these for Australia. I would assume they were released around the same time, though, so I would wonder which side of the pond, or which side of the continent, because I guess it's Asia in the way? Or is it a pond because of the Indian Ocean? Which of these locations actually had the idea for this first as a promotion? Didn't exist over here. But Heroes is essentially the Heroes disc. Just take the newspaper names off of the logo when the video is playing and add a menu with just one option that's kind of weird. Then just relabel and re-sleeve the thing. Then, of course, you have a villain disc. Now, what's interesting here is that whereas it was 2 different newspapers in the UK, and there will be 2 different newspapers involved in Australia, it's actually the Daily Telegraph, again, that gave us villains. So our cover here basically just is the same thing we saw with Heroes. It just says villains on it. And then the back focuses on the dark side of things from that cover, kind of, whereas the previous one kind of pulled from the Heroes side for its artwork on the back. This one pulls from the villain side. But Star Wars villains essentially set up like we saw on Heroes. And again, the disc in similar fashion here. Very, very busy. I always thought that the discs on the ones from the UK just felt a little plain, but now seeing these that are so busy with so much stuff crammed on those disc labels, I actually prefer the UK labels to the Australian labels. Sorry, Australia, you just tried to cram way, 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 way too much onto those labels. And on that disc, just as you would expect based on my description of the Heroes disc, it works out the same way. Exact same content, except in the video, when it has the villain's title pulling away, it has no newspaper names at all, and there's a menu with only one option to just click villains. Like, psychologically, it reminds me of, like, what sometimes restaurants become, right? Where you go to the same place, and you go there so often, you always order the same thing, that they might as well only have a menu with one item on it. It's kind of what we've got here. What's interesting is that Australia took it a step further. Notice, 2 individual sleeves without the ability to combine them into a single product, whereas the UK had that first one come with a sleeve that had extra space for the second disc in it, and then the second disc had its own sleeve or could be taken out and stuck in here. There was no by-itself version of Heroes in some other single disc packaging. It was always this packaging, whether it had the Villains DVD in it or not. Well, in Australia, instead of doing something like that, after or around the same time as you got those Daily Telegraph single disc sleeve versions, another newspaper comes into play with this. Star Wars Heroes and Villains. Again, a similar setup here for the front. On the back, Star Wars Heroes and Villains, similar setup again, but notice, aside from the fact that it just has the artwork that's more from the top of that front artwork, it's a different newspaper. The Herald Sun Sunday. I'm assuming Sunday edition of the Herald Sun. So what is this? It's both discs, presumably, right? No. There's a Heroes disc in Australia. There's a Villains disc in Australia. There's also a Heroes and Villains disc in Australia. Again, set up effectively the same way as far as our information goes. You put this in and you actually get a menu that matters. There's 2 options on it. Bet you can't guess what they are. Yeah, Heroes and Villains. Although underneath it says, select Heroes or Villains to find out their secrets. Had to take a picture of that menu on my phone to remind myself exactly what it said. To learn their secrets. Ooh. But yeah, they've taken just the two little video things, right? Heroes and villains, put them on the same DVD, and now the menu matters because now you choose between them. But it's the same versions without those newspaper names that you saw on these. Kind of odd. I mean, it seems kind of redundant, right? Why not have one disc with both, or two individual discs? Why both as an option? Why individual and together? In the UK, it was to try to get you to pick up both newspapers, right? Because one had the other. In Australia, you had two different newspapers, except they were kind of redundant to each other. You only really needed to follow one of the newspapers to get all of Heroes and Villains. It was just a question of whether you wanted it as two discs or one, two sleeves or one. Interesting. A little more consumer-friendly to do it that way, rather than having you have to buy a newspaper perhaps you didn't subscribe to or didn't normally get, as in the UK, to get the other of the two discs. In Australia, you could do one or the other and still be fine content-wise. But of course, if you're a collector, you're still going to wind up getting 3 newspapers in this case to be able to get all 3 of these different products. Kind of an interesting thing. And the fact that they just changed that intro to get rid of the names of the newspapers, or to add them in the UK case if it was Australia first, just is kind of an odd little tweak. Why put the newspaper names on there at all if you're going to do this in multiple regions that won't be using the same newspapers? It's an odd choice all around. But a cool find, and again, my thanks to Father Matthew Hardesty to sort of pointing me in the direction of going after these finally, after I had sort of ignored it after seeing it on eBay from time to time. I just never taken the time to get them. Very glad that I did, because it makes for a cool little side item. I look forward to putting this as a little sidebar item, a Meanwhile in the United Kingdom thing, in a Saga on Home Video 2nd edition, and being able to show the UK one, then having a Meanwhile in Australia to show the Australian one when there's no US equivalent. So it makes for a nice little neat side item to put in the book that might be new to those who are fans just collecting in the US. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers.